They called her worthless, a burden no man would ever want, a widow with 10 hungry mouths and empty hands, cast out like trash on the unforgiving frontier. Mara Holt had reached the end. No money, no home, no hope. The town had made its judgment clear. She and her children were invisible. But when the dust settled and the world turned its back, one man rode in from the horizon. He didn't see a burden. He saw something everyone else had missed. This is their story, a tale of redemption, second chances, and love found in the ruins. If you're watching from anywhere in this world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. The sun hung merciless over the town of Bitter Creek, Wyoming, bleaching the wooden storefronts and turning the dirt streets into cracked veins of dust. It was the kind of heat that made breathing feel like punishment, that turned skin raw and throats dry before noon. And standing at the edge of that forsaken place, where civilization met the wild nothing beyond, was Mara Holt. She didn't look like much anymore. Once, she had been the wife of Samuel Holt, a cattle rancher with decent prospects and a good name. Once, she had worn clean dresses and walked through town with her head high, children trailing behind her like ducklings in a neat row. Once she had belonged. Now she was a ghost. The infant in her arms, little Thomas, barely 4 months old, squirmed against her chest, his tiny face red from the heat. Behind her, 9 other children clustered in various states of exhaustion and fear. The oldest, Daniel, was 14, his jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded Mara so much of Samuel it hurt. The youngest who could walk, 3-year-old Lily, clung to her sister Ruth's hand, her thumb lodged firmly in her mouth, eyes wide and uncomprehending. They had been standing there for 2 hours. 2 hours of watching doors close. 2 hours of seeing curtains twitch and then go still. 2 hours of being invisible. "Mama," Daniel said quietly, his voice cracking in that way voices do when boyhood is losing its battle with manhood. "We should go." Go where? Mara wanted to ask. But she didn't, because Daniel knew as well as she did that there was nowhere left. The wagon that had carried them this far, borrowed from a neighbor who had made it clear it needed to be returned by sundown, sat empty behind them, their few remaining possessions already unloaded because they had no place to put them. 3 trunks of clothes, mostly outgrown or worn through, a set of tin dishes, Samuel's Bible, though Mara hadn't been able to bring herself to open it since the funeral, a quilt her mother had made, the only thing of real value they had left, and even that was fraying at the edges. Everything else was gone. The ranch, seized for debt she didn't even know Samuel had accumulated. The livestock, sold at auction to pay creditors who showed up like vultures the moment Samuel's body was cold. The house, every stick of furniture, every pan and pot, all of it claimed by men with papers and cold eyes who didn't care that a woman with 10 children had nowhere to go. The law was clear. Widows had no rights to property that carried debt. And Samuel, God rest him, had died owing more than the ranch was worth. Mara had tried. Lord knows she had tried. She had gone to the bank first, hat in hand, asking for just enough to get by until she could find work. The banker, Mr. Sparsam. Thornton, a man who had smiled at her across the church pews for years, had looked through her like she was glass. "Mrs. Holt, you must understand our position. Your husband's debts." "I'm not asking for charity," Mara had interrupted, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm asking for a small loan. I can work. I can clean. I can cook. I can—" "With 10 children." Thornton had raised an eyebrow. "Who's going to hire a woman who has to stop every few hours to nurse an infant? Who can't work a full day because she has to see to that many youngsters?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Holt, but the bank can't take that risk." She had tried the church next. Reverend Michaels had been more polite, his rejection wrapped in scripture and sympathetic nods. But the answer was the same. The congregation would pray for her, certainly. They might even be able to spare a few dollars for food. But take in a widow with 10 children, house them, feed them long term? That's beyond our capacity, I'm afraid. She had gone door to door after that, to families she had known for years, to women who had borrowed her preserves and admired her needlework, to men who had tipped their hats to Samuel and called him friend. Every door had closed. Some did it quickly, with barely a word. Others took longer, offered excuses dressed up as reasons. We just don't have the room. Times are hard for everyone. Perhaps if you had family back east, but the meaning was always the same. You and your children are not our problem. The worst had been Martha Green, a woman Mara had considered a friend. They had canned tomatoes together just last summer, their children playing in the yard while they worked. But when Mara had knocked on her door yesterday, Martha had opened it only a crack, her face tight with something between pity and disgust. Mara, I'm sorry, but John says we can't get involved. He says it wouldn't be proper. Proper? Mara had repeated, the word tasting like ash. You're alone now. A woman alone with all those children? People talk. John says it's not appropriate for us to take you in. People might get the wrong idea. The door had closed before Mara could respond. She had stood there, staring at the painted wood, feeling something break inside her that she didn't have a name for. That was when she understood. It wasn't just about the burden of feeding 10 extra mouths. It was about what she represented. A woman without a man was dangerous, untethered, improper, a reminder of how quickly security could vanish. She was a cautionary tale no one wanted living in their spare room. So now she stood at the edge of town with everything she owned in 3 trunks and nowhere to go. Daniel touched her elbow. Mama, people are staring. He was right. Across the street, 2 women had stopped their conversation to watch. Their faces showed no sympathy, only that peculiar satisfaction people get when witnessing someone else's misfortune, grateful it isn't their own. Little Thomas began to fuss, his small fists batting against Mara's chest. He was hungry. She had nursed him an hour ago, but her milk was thin. Had been thin for weeks because she barely ate anymore, giving most of her portions to the older children. Shh, baby, she murmured, swaying slightly. Shh, it's all right. But it wasn't all right. Nothing was all right. Rebecca, her second oldest at 12, moved closer. She was a serious child, had always been, with Samuel's dark eyes and a gravity beyond her years. Mama, what are we going to do? Mara looked down at her daughter's face, at the trust there despite everything, and felt her throat tighten. What were they going to do? The afternoon stage would leave in an hour. She had just enough money for tickets partway east, maybe as far as Cheyenne. But then what? She had no family left, no one to take them in. And winter was coming. She could feel it in the sharpness of the morning air, see it in how early the sun was setting now. 10 children. How did you keep 10 children alive through a Wyoming winter with no roof over their heads? We'll figure something out, Mara said, hearing the hollowness in her own voice. We always do. It was a lie, and Rebecca was old enough to know it. A wagon rattled past, kicking up dust that made Lily cough. The driver didn't even glance their way. Invisible. They were already invisible. Mara's legs ached from standing, but there was nowhere to sit except the ground, and she had that much pride left at least, not to sit in the dirt like a beggar while the town watched. So she stood, infant in arms, children clustered around her, and felt the weight of her failure pressing down like the merciless sun. Samuel, she thought, not for the first time. Why did you leave us like this? Why didn't you tell me about the debts? Why didn't you? But anger at a dead man was useless. Samuel had been a good husband, a good father. He had worked himself to exhaustion running that ranch, trying to make it profitable in a market that squeezed small ranchers dry. He hadn't meant to die, hadn't meant to leave her alone with 10 children and debts that swallowed everything. The fever had taken him in 3 days. One morning he was coughing over breakfast, insisting it was nothing. By evening he was burning up, delirious. By the 3rd dawn, he was gone. Mara had buried him on the hill behind their house, the house that wasn't hers anymore, under the cottonwood tree where they used to sit in the evenings, watching the children play. She had stood over that grave with dirt on her hands and an infant in her arms and thought, now what? Now she knew. Now was standing at the edge of a town that wanted nothing to do with her, watching her children's faces grow gaunt, listening to her baby cry from hunger she couldn't fully satisfy. Mama! It was Joseph, one of the middle boys, just 8 years old. I'm thirsty. They all were. She could see it in their dry lips, hear it in the way the younger ones' voices had gone raspy. The canteen was empty, had been since this morning. There was a public pump 2 streets over, but Mara had already felt the weight of the town's judgment, walking through those streets again, trailing her children like a parade of failure. But they needed water. "All right," she said, trying to sound decisive, like she was still in control. "Let's get water, and then we'll decide what to do next." They walked through town in a ragged line, Mara at the front with Thomas, the other children following in order of age like they'd been taught. People stopped to stare. Conversations died as they passed. Mara kept her eyes forward, her back straight despite how badly she wanted to collapse. The pump was in the small square where the weekly market was held. Now, mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, it was mostly empty except for a few old-timers sitting outside the general store, whittling and spitting tobacco. They watched Mara and her children approach with the casual interest of men who had nothing better to do. Daniel worked the pump while Rebecca held the canteen. The younger children waited their turn, patient in that way children learn when resources are scarce. Mara stood to the side, jostling Thomas gently, trying to keep him from fussing. "That the Holt widow?" one of the old men said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Yep. Heard she got turned out. Debts, you know. 10 kids, I heard. Can you imagine? 10! No man's gonna want that. That's for damn sure." Mara's face burned, but she didn't react. Just watched Rebecca carefully portion out the water, making sure the little ones didn't drink too fast and make themselves sick. Heard she tried everywhere. Bank, church, everywhere. Nobody would take her in. Can't blame 'em. That many mouths to feed in this economy? Hell, most folks are barely keeping their own fed. Still, 10 kids. What's she gonna do? Probably end up having to split 'em up. Orphanage, maybe. Or indenture some of the older ones out. Mara's hands tightened on Thomas. Split them up. The thought made her physically ill. But she'd heard the same suggestion from Reverend Michaels, phrased more delicately. Perhaps if some of the older children could be placed with families who need help, it would lighten your burden. Never. She would die before she let them be separated. "Mama?" Daniel had finished filling the canteen. "We're done." Mara nodded, preparing to gather the children and leave, when she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats, slow and steady, coming from the direction of open range. Everyone turned to look. A single rider was approaching town, leading a pack horse. Even from a distance, there was something different about him. He sat his horse like a man who'd been born in the saddle, easy and natural, no wasted movement. As he got closer, Mara could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. The old-timers straightened up, their casual demeanor shifting to something more alert. "That's Cole Barrett," one of them muttered. "What's he doing in town? Thought he never came in except for supplies once a month. Been near 6 weeks since we seen him last." The rider, Barrett, guided his horse toward the general store, moving past the square where Mara stood with her children. As he passed, his head turned slightly, and for just a moment, his eyes met Mara's. They were gray, she noticed. Light gray, almost silver in the harsh sunlight. And something in them, some quality she couldn't name, made her breath catch. Then he looked away, continuing toward the store, and the moment broke. "Who is that?" Rebecca whispered. "Nobody," one of the old-timers said loudly enough for them to hear. "Just Barrett. Keeps to himself out at his ranch. Don't talk much. Don't come to town much. Don't bother nobody." Mara watched as the man dismounted with fluid grace, tied his horse to the rail, and disappeared into the general store without a word to anyone. Something about him unsettled her, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was just that he was the first person all day who had looked at her, really looked, without judgment or pity in his eyes. Just looked. Seen. "Come on," Mara said, pulling her attention away. "Let's go." They walked back toward their trunks, back toward the decision that still waited. The stage would leave soon. She needed to choose, east with no destination or what? There was no or. By the time they reached their meager pile of belongings, Mara's arms were shaking from holding Thomas, and her head felt light with hunger and heat. She sank down onto one of the trunks, finally allowing herself to sit, and closed her eyes for just a moment. "Mrs. Holt?" Her eyes flew open. Standing in front of her, blocking the sun, was the man, Barrett. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe early 30s, with weathered skin and a strong jaw dark with several days' stubble. His coat was worn but well maintained, his boots scuffed but solid, and he was holding a wrapped package. Mara started, confused. Yes? Heard you might need this. He extended the package. Some bread, cheese, few other things. Mara stared at the package, then at him. I don't have money to pay you. Didn't ask for money. Behind her, she could feel her children tensing, hope and suspicion warring on their faces. Nobody gave something for nothing. There was always a price. Why? The word came out sharper than she intended. Barrett's expression didn't change. Because you got hungry kids, and I got food. Seems pretty simple. He set the package on the trunk beside her when she didn't take it, then stepped back. For a long moment, nobody moved. Mara looked at the package, at this stranger, at her children's hollow eyes. Pride wanted her to refuse. Pride wanted to tell him to keep his charity, that the Holts could take care of themselves. But pride didn't fill empty bellies. Thank you, she whispered. Barrett nodded once, a slight dip of his head, and turned to leave. Wait, Mara found herself saying. Why are you helping us? You don't even know us. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Don't have to know someone to see they need help. Everyone else in this town knows us, Mara said, surprising herself with the bitterness in her voice. Didn't seem to matter. Something flickered in those gray eyes, not quite anger, but something harder. I'm not everyone else. Then he was walking away, back toward his horse and the general store, leaving Mara staring after him. Daniel moved first, reaching for the package with trembling hands. Inside was more food than they'd seen in days. A loaf of fresh bread, a wedge of yellow cheese, dried apples, beef jerky, even a small jar of honey. The children crowded around, their eyes wide with hunger and disbelief. Can we, Mama? Joseph asked, his hand hovering over the bread. Mara looked at the food, then toward the store where Barrett had disappeared, then back at her children's desperate faces. Yes, she said softly, but slowly. Small bites. Don't make yourselves sick. She watched the meat, rationing the portions carefully, making Daniel and Rebecca take their share even though she knew they wanted to give it all to the younger ones. And while they ate, she nursed Thomas, feeling her milk come a little easier with food finally in her own stomach. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The afternoon stage had come and gone without them. Mara had let it leave, unable to force herself to make that final decision, to buy those tickets to nowhere. Now sitting on her trunk with her children around her and a stranger's kindness in their bellies, she felt something shift. Not hope, exactly. Hope seemed too big, too fragile. But maybe just the smallest opening of possibility. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out what to do. Tomorrow, she would have to face the impossible question of how to keep her children alive. But tonight, for the first time since Samuel died, they had full stomachs. It wasn't much, but it was something. Across the street, Barrett emerged from the general store with his supplies, loaded them onto his pack horse with efficient movements, and mounted up. For just a second, his eyes found Mara's again across the distance. She lifted her hand slightly, a gesture of gratitude she couldn't quite articulate. He touched the brim of his hat in response, a gesture so small it might have been imagination, and then rode out of town the way he'd come, toward the open range and whatever solitary life he lived out there. Mara watched until he was just a speck on the horizon, until the dust from his horse's hooves had settled back to earth. "Mama," Rebecca said quietly, "what do we do now?" Mara looked at her daughter, at all her children, at the town that had rejected them and the empty road stretching east. "I don't know, baby," she admitted. "I honestly don't know." But for the first time, that admission didn't feel like complete defeat, because someone had seen them today. Someone had helped without asking for anything in return. Someone had reminded her that not everyone had stopped being human. As the sun set over Bitter Creek and the shadows grew long, Mara Holt sat with her children and allowed herself to believe just for a moment that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow might bring something other than more closed doors. She was wrong about what that something would be, but she was right that everything was about to change. The night was cold colder than Mara had expected for late September, and she had no way to build a fire in the middle of town without drawing more attention to their misery. So they huddled together on and around the trunks, the older children wrapping their arms around the younger ones, sharing what warmth their thin bodies could provide. Mara didn't sleep. She sat with Thomas against her chest, feeling his small heart beat through the layers of fabric, and watched the stars wheel overhead. Every sound made her tense: footsteps, voices, the distant bark of a dog. She kept expecting someone to come tell them to move along, to stop loitering, to take their poverty somewhere less visible. But no one came. By dawn, a fine mist had settled over the town, turning everything gray and ghostly. The children stirred slowly, stiff from the cold and the hard ground. Daniel was the first to sit up, his face pale and drawn in the thin light. "Mama," he said quietly, so as not to wake the little ones, "we can't stay here another night." Mara knew he was right. The food from yesterday was already gone, carefully rationed through the evening and the cold night. Thomas needed changing, and she had only 2 clean cloths left. The younger children needed washing. They all needed shelter. "I know," she said. "I'm going to try again today. Someone has to help us." But even as she said it, she knew it was false hope. She had already knocked on every door. There was no one left to ask. Rebecca woke next, and then the others, slowly emerging from sleep into the harsh reality of another day with no home, no prospects, no future beyond the next few hours. Mara did her best to make them presentable, smoothing hair and brushing dust from clothes, but they all looked exactly like what they were: destitute. The town came alive around them as the morning progressed. Shopkeepers opened their doors, sweeping their stoops, and carefully not looking at the widow and her children still camped at the edge of the square. Wagons began to roll through, kicking up dust. Women with market baskets hurried past, eyes averted. Invisible again. Mara was trying to decide whether to spend her last few coins on bread or save them for another night's shelter in case, though she had no idea where that shelter might be, when she heard the hoofbeats again. She looked up, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and felt her heart skip strangely. It was Barrett, riding in from the same direction as yesterday, his horse moving at an easy walk. He was leading 2 additional horses this time, both saddled but riderless. As he approached the square, his eyes found Mara immediately, as if he'd known exactly where she would be. He reined in his horse a few feet away and dismounted with that same fluid grace she'd noticed before. "Morning," he said simply. "Good morning," Mara managed, acutely aware of how she must look. Wrinkled dress, hair coming loose from its pins, exhaustion written in every line of her face. Barrett looked at the children, counting them silently, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes came back to Mara. "You planning on staying in town?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. No. I mean, we can't. We don't have anywhere else to go yet." "Yet," Barrett repeated, something that might have been skepticism in his tone. "How long you been looking?" 2 days, Mara admitted, then added with more defiance than she felt. "But I haven't tried everywhere. Someone will—" "No, they won't." The bluntness of it stole her breath. Mara's hands tightened on Thomas. "You don't know that." "I know this town," Barrett said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "And I know nobody here is going to take in a widow with 10 kids, no matter how much they ought to. You could knock on every door from here to Cheyenne, and the answer would be the same." Mara felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. "Then what do you suggest I do? Just give up? Let my children—" "I'm suggesting you stop wasting time looking for help that isn't coming," Barrett interrupted, "and consider an alternative." Mara stared at him, her mind racing. An alternative? What alternative could there possibly be? Barrett glanced at the children again, then back at her. "I got a ranch about 8 miles north of here. It's not much, but it's solid. 3-bedroom house, barn, good well, enough land to keep a small herd. I work it alone." He paused and Mara held her breath, not daring to understand what he might be suggesting. "I could use help," he continued. "General work, cooking, mending, tending the garden, looking after chickens. The older boys could help with livestock and fence work. In exchange, you'd have a roof, food, and safety for your kids." Mara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. You're offering us work? All of us?" "I'm offering you a choice," Barrett corrected. You can keep trying to find someone in this town who'll help you out of the goodness of their heart, or you can come work for room and board until you figure out what you want to do next. No strings, no expectations beyond honest work. You want to leave after a week, a month, whenever. That's your business. It was too good to be true. It had to be. Men didn't offer widows with 10 children work and shelter out of simple kindness. There was always a price, always something expected that wasn't spoken out loud. Mara looked at him carefully, searching his face for signs of the ulterior motives she knew must be there. But his expression remained neutral, almost indifferent, like he was discussing the price of cattle rather than offering to change her entire life. "Why?" she asked, the same question as yesterday, but weighted with more desperation. "Why would you do this?" Barrett shifted his weight slightly, the leather of his saddle creaking. "Because I got space and you need it. Because those kids deserve better than sleeping in the dirt. Because—" he paused, seemed to consider his words. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it, and I figure that kind of thing ought to be passed along." "But 10 children," Mara pressed. "That's not just help. That's a lot of mouths to feed," Barrett finished. "I know, I can count, but a ranch runs better with hands to work it, and you got 10 pairs of hands that need purpose. Seems like it could work out for both of us." Daniel had been listening to the entire exchange, and now he stepped forward, his young face serious. "What kind of work would you expect from us, sir?" Barrett looked at the boy with something like approval. "You know anything about cattle?" "Some. My pa ran a small herd before—" Daniel's voice caught. "Before. Then you'd help me with feeding, checking fences, moving cattle when needed. Nothing you couldn't handle." Barrett's gaze moved to Rebecca. "You know cooking. Preserving?" Rebecca nodded, finding her voice. "Yes, sir. I've been doing most of it since Ma had the baby." "Good. Garden needs harvesting, and I got more vegetables than one person can process. There's chickens need tending, eggs to collect, butter to churn." He looked back at Mara. "Plenty of work to go around, enough to earn your keep, but nothing that'll break you." Mara's mind was spinning. It sounded too perfect, too convenient. And yet, looking at this man's weathered face, his steady gray eyes, she couldn't detect any deception. He seemed to mean exactly what he said. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "You don't know us. We could be thieves or lazy or—" "Could be," Barrett agreed. "But I don't figure a woman who's been trying to keep 10 kids alive on her own is any of those things. And if I'm wrong, well, like I said, no strings. You can leave whenever you want." It was the last part that made Mara start to believe him, because if he had darker intentions, he wouldn't give her an easy way out. He wouldn't make it clear that she was free to go. Still, she hesitated. Pride warred with desperation, and desperation was winning, but pride was putting up a fight. "Mrs. Holt," Barrett said, his voice gentler than before, "I'm not asking you to decide your whole future right now. I'm just asking if you want a roof over your kids' heads tonight instead of another night in the cold. Everything else can sort itself out later." The baby made a small sound against Mara's chest, and she looked down at Thomas's tiny face, then up at her other children. They were all watching her with a mixture of hope and fear, waiting for her to make the decision that would determine whether they ate today, whether they slept warm tonight. She thought about Samuel, about what he would want her to do, and she knew, bone deep, that he would want his children safe and fed, regardless of pride or propriety. "All right," Mara said, the word coming out barely above a whisper, then stronger. "All right, we'll come. But I work for what we receive. This isn't charity." "Wouldn't offer it if it was," Barrett said. He gestured to the extra horses. "These are for the young ones who can't walk the whole way. We'll load your things on the pack horse." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Barrett proved surprisingly efficient at organizing, directing Daniel and Rebecca in loading the trunks while settling the younger children on the horses. He lifted little Lily up with such careful ease that Mara felt something in her chest tighten. When was the last time someone had helped with the children? When was the last time she hadn't had to do everything alone? The town watched them prepare to leave with the same cold curiosity they'd shown before. The old-timers were back on their bench, whittling and observing. "Barrett's taking in the Holt widow," one of them said, loud enough to carry. "Now that's something. Fool thing to do, you ask me. 10 kids? That's asking for trouble." Maybe he's got plans for her. Widow that desperate might agree to all kinds of arrangements. Mara's face burned, but before she could respond, Barrett turned to face the men. He didn't raise his voice, didn't change his expression, but something in his posture made the old-timer shrink back slightly. "You gentlemen got something you want to say to me directly?" he asked, his tone pleasant, but with an edge underneath that suggested they really didn't want to test him. The men exchanged glances, suddenly very interested in their whittling. "Didn't think so," Barrett said quietly. He turned back to Mara. "Ready?" She nodded, settling Thomas more securely in his sling, and they began the journey out of town. Mara walked beside Barrett's horse, Daniel on her other side, with Rebecca and the younger children following on the borrowed horses. It was a strange procession, and Mara felt every eye in Bitter Creek watching them leave. Let them watch, she thought with sudden fierceness. Let them watch, and know that someone in this world still had decency. They had barely cleared the last buildings when Joseph called out from his horse. "Mister, what's your name? I mean, your first name." Barrett glanced back. "Cole." "That's a good name," Joseph said with the easy certainty of an 8-year-old. "I'm Joseph. That's Ruth and Mary and Lily up here with me. And that's Samuel Jr., but we call him Sam. And that's Catherine, but we call her Kathy. And the baby's Thomas. And Joseph," Mara interrupted gently, "I'm sure Mr. Barrett doesn't need everyone's life story right now." "Cole," Barrett corrected, looking at her. "And it's fine. Good to know who everyone is." So Joseph continued his narration, pointing out each sibling and sharing completely unnecessary details like how Mary was afraid of spiders and Sam could whistle through his teeth and Kathy once found a bird's egg and kept it warm until it hatched. Cole listened without interrupting, occasionally asking a question that made Joseph puff up with importance at being taken seriously. The road north was well-worn but empty this time of morning. On either side, the prairie stretched out in shades of gold and amber, broken occasionally by rock formations or stands of cottonwood marking where water ran underground. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and the air smelled like sage and dust and the last warmth of summer before autumn truly settled in. Mara found herself relaxing slightly as they walked, the rhythm of the journey soothing in its simplicity. 1 foot in front of the other, 1 mile behind them, 1 mile closer to something that might be shelter. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked Cole, partly because the silence felt strange, and partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "About 5 years. Bought it from a man who was heading back east. It was pretty run down then, still is in some ways, but it's home." "And you've been working it alone all this time?" "Mostly. I hire help during roundup sometimes, but day to day, yeah, it's just me." Mara couldn't imagine it. She had grown up on a farm, married into a ranch, and both places had been full of people, parents, siblings, hired hands, neighbors helping neighbors. The idea of being that alone, that isolated, seemed unbearable. "Don't you get lonely?" The question was out before she could stop it. Too personal, too familiar. But Cole didn't seem offended. He just shrugged. "Sometimes. But there's worse things than lonely." Something in his tone suggested he spoke from experience, and Mara didn't press further. They walked in companionable quiet for a while, broken only by Joseph's ongoing commentary and the occasional question from one of the other children. Mara noticed that Cole answered each question patiently, never brushing them off or telling them to be quiet, even when their curiosity must have been wearing. After about an hour, they stopped to rest and water the horses at a small creek that cut across the trail. Cole helped the children down and showed them where to drink, cautioning them to let the water settle first. Mara nursed Thomas in the shade of a cottonwood while Rebecca distributed the last of yesterday's bread. Cole pulled some jerky from his saddlebag and offered it around. The children ate hungrily, and Mara felt another surge of gratitude mixed with shame. They were so hungry, always so hungry, and she had been powerless to fix it. "How much farther?" Daniel asked, trying to sound casual, but Mara could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Another hour, maybe less," Cole said. "There's a rise about 2 miles up. Once we crest that, you'll be able to see the ranch." "Is it nice?" Lily asked, her thumb creeping toward her mouth. Cole considered the question seriously. "It's solid. The house needs paint and the barn could use some repairs, but everything works. There's a creek that runs through the property, and a good stand of trees where the deer like to come down in the evening. Gardens mostly played out for the year, but there's still squash and late tomatoes. Chickens are productive. Got about 30 head of cattle, give or take. Do you have a dog? Sam asked hopefully. No dog. Had one once, but Cole's expression flickered with something that might have been grief. He passed a couple years back. Haven't gotten another. We had a dog named Buck, Sam said sadly. But when Pa died and the men came to take everything, they took Buck too. Said he was valuable. The bitterness in her son's young voice made Mara's heart ache. These children had lost so much, and they were still losing innocence, security, the simple joy of childhood. Cole's jaw tightened slightly. That's rough, son. I'm sorry. They finished their rest and continued on, the sun climbing higher and the heat building despite the approaching autumn. Mara's feet hurt in her worn boots, and her arms ached from carrying Thomas, but she didn't complain. This was temporary discomfort leading toward shelter. She could endure it. True to Cole's word, they crested a long rise about an hour later, and the ranch came into view below them. It wasn't impressive by any standard. Mara had seen bigger, better-kept properties, but after days of having nothing, it looked like paradise. The house was a simple two-story structure, weathered gray wood that might have been white once, with a covered porch running across the front. The barn was larger than the house, solid-looking despite its age, with a corral attached where a few horses grazed. There was a chicken coop, a small bunkhouse, what looked like a smokehouse, and several other outbuildings in various states of repair. But what caught Mara's attention was the trees. A beautiful stand of cottonwoods grew along what must be the creek Cole had mentioned, their leaves already starting to turn gold. There was shade, real shade, and the promise of water. "Oh," Rebecca breathed beside her. "Mama, look." "I see it, baby," Mara said, her voice thick with emotion she didn't want to show. They descended the rise and approached the ranch proper. As they got closer, Mara could see the details Cole had mentioned, the peeling paint, the fence rails that needed replacing, the weeds growing up around the porch. But she could also see that everything was fundamentally sound. This was a working ranch, worn from use but not from neglect. Cole led them straight to the house, dismounting and helping the children down with the same patient efficiency he'd shown all morning. Mara stood in the yard with Thomas, suddenly uncertain. This was real. This was happening. She was about to enter a stranger's home with her 10 children, trusting that his word was good, that his intentions were honorable, that this wasn't all some terrible mistake. Cole opened the front door and gestured for them to enter. "It's not fancy, but it's clean." Mara stepped inside and immediately felt tears prick her eyes. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, but as her eyes adjusted, she could see a large main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with mismatched chairs, a worn sofa, and shelves lined with books. To the left was a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove and a dry sink. Stairs along the right wall led up to what must be the bedrooms. It smelled like wood smoke and coffee and something else, something that reminded Mara of the ranch she'd lost, of home. The children filed in behind her, their eyes wide with wonder and relief. After sleeping outside, even this simple space felt like luxury. "2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 down here," Cole said, setting down the packs he'd carried in. "I'll take the bunkhouse, give you all the main house." "No," Mara said quickly. "We can't take your home. The bunkhouse will be fine for us, or the barn." "Mrs. Holt?" Cole interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. 10 kids aren't sleeping in a bunkhouse or a barn. You take the house. I've slept in worse places than that bunkhouse. It's got a stove and a good bed. I'll be comfortable." "But this is not a negotiation," Cole said, though his voice was still even, not unkind. "You need space for all these kids, and the house has it. End of discussion." Mara wanted to argue further, but she was too tired and too grateful and too overwhelmed, so she just nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you," she managed. Cole nodded shortly, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude, and moved to the kitchen. "I'll show you where everything is, then I've got to check on the cattle. The older boys can come with me if they want to learn the property, or they can rest first. Their choice." "I'll come," Daniel said immediately, eager to prove his worth. "Me too," Joseph added. Cole looked at Mara for permission, and she nodded. The boys needed purpose, needed to feel useful. She understood that. For the next hour, Cole walked her through the house, showing her the root cellar stocked with preserves and vegetables, the pantry with flour and beans and coffee, the bedroom upstairs with 2 large beds that could fit multiple children each, the smaller bedroom that could serve as a nursery for Thomas and the youngest girls. There was a pump inside the kitchen, actual running water inside the house, a luxury Mara hadn't had at the old ranch, and a bathing room with a copper tub. I usually heat water on the stove for bathing, Cole explained. There's soap and towels in the cupboard. Use whatever you need. Mara's mind was reeling. This was more than she'd dared hope for. This was safety, comfort, space for her children to spread out and breathe. Rebecca was already exploring the kitchen, examining the pots and pans, the dishes in the cupboard. Mama, can I start something for supper? There's chicken in the cold box and vegetables in the cellar, and— Yes, Mara said, hearing the eagerness in her daughter's voice. Rebecca, like Daniel, needed purpose, needed to contribute. Yes, that would be wonderful. Cole showed the boys where the livestock was kept, explaining the feeding schedules and the layout of the property, while Mara got the younger children settled. She heated water for washing and bathed them one by one, marveling at the simple luxury of warm water and clean towels. The dirt of days on the road swirled down the drain, and her children emerged pink-cheeked and looking more like themselves. By the time Cole and the boys returned for supper, the house smelled like roasted chicken and baked squash, and the table was set with dishes that didn't match but were clean and whole. The children sat in actual chairs instead of on the ground, and there was enough food for everyone to have seconds. Cole took a seat at the head of the table, looking faintly surprised by the transformation of his usually silent house. The children, remembering their manners, waited for Mara to serve before reaching for their plates. For a few minutes, the only sound was eating. The children too hungry and too focused on the miracle of a full meal to talk. But gradually, as their bellies filled, they began to relax. Sam started telling Cole about the creek they'd spotted behind the house, asking if there were fish in it. Lily shyly asked if Cole had ever seen a bear. Joseph wanted to know everything about the cattle. Mara watched her host field questions with remarkable patience, answering each child seriously, never dismissing their curiosity as childish or annoying. And she felt something shift inside her. Not quite trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The sense that maybe, just maybe, this man was exactly what he appeared to be. Someone decent in a world that had shown her precious little decency lately. After supper, while Rebecca and the older girls cleaned up, Mara stepped out onto the porch with Thomas to nurse him in the cooling evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and the first stars were beginning to appear. She heard the screen door creak and looked up to see Cole standing there, his hat in his hands. "Kids all settled?" he asked. "Getting there. Daniel's helping the little ones get ready for bed. She paused, searching for the right word. "They're happy. I haven't seen them this calm in weeks." Cole nodded, looking out at the darkening prairie. "They're good kids. You've done well with them." The compliment caught Mara off guard. She was so used to being seen as a failure, the widow who couldn't provide, the mother who had let her children come to this, that praise felt foreign. "I don't know about that," she said quietly. "If I'd done well, they wouldn't have been sleeping in the street. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" Mara's voice cracked slightly. "Samuel's debts, the ranch. Maybe if I'd paid more attention, if I'd known what was happening—" "Stop," Cole said, his voice firm but not harsh. "I don't know what happened with your husband, but I know this. The law that takes everything from a widow with kids and leaves her with nothing isn't her fault. The neighbors who close their doors instead of helping aren't her fault. The town that turns its back isn't her fault. You've been surviving impossible circumstances. That's not failure. That's strength." Mara felt tears spill over, hot against her cold cheeks. She hadn't cried since the funeral, hadn't let herself because once she started, she was afraid she'd never stop. But now, in the safety of this porch, with this stranger who saw her struggles and didn't judge her for them, the dam broke. She cried silently, not wanting to wake Thomas or alert the children inside, and Cole simply stood there, not trying to comfort her with empty words or awkward touches, just giving her the space to fall apart. When she finally got control of herself, wiping her face with the corner of Thomas's blanket, She felt hollowed out, but also lighter somehow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, the distant call of an owl, the soft lowing of cattle settling for sleep. "Cole," Mara said finally, "why are you really doing this?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "I told you. Someone helped me once." "But there must be more to it than that." Another long pause. Then Cole turned to look at her, his face half shadowed in the twilight. "When I was 15, my parents died in a fire. House burned to the ground with them in it. I got out because I was in the barn that night, but everything else was gone. Them, the house, all our belongings, everything." Mara's breath caught. "I'm so sorry. I had nobody. No family, no money, nowhere to go. And I was too proud to ask for help, too angry at the world to accept it when it was offered. I lived rough for a couple years, doing odd jobs, sleeping wherever I could find shelter. Nearly died one winter from cold and hunger." He paused, his hands tightening on his hat. "Then I met a man named John McKinnon. He ran a ranch down in Colorado, and he needed help with the roundup. I signed on thinking it was just a few weeks' work, but when roundup was over, he asked me to stay. Said he liked my work. So I did. Stayed 3 years, learned everything he could teach me about ranching, about land, about how to build something that lasts." "He sounds like a good man," Mara said softly. "Best man I ever knew. When I turned 20, he helped me buy this place, loaned me the money for the down payment, co-signed at the bank, even came up here and helped me fix the worst of the repairs." Cole's voice roughened slightly. "He died 2 years ago. Heart gave out while he was working cattle. But before he died, he told me I'd paid back the loan 10 times over just by being the kind of man who'd do for others what he did for me." He looked back at Mara, his eyes bright in the gathering dark. "So when I see a woman with 10 kids and nowhere to go, sleeping in the dirt because the whole town turned its back, I remember being 15 and angry and alone. And I remember that someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. Seems like the least I can do is pass that along." Mara didn't know what to say. There were no words big enough to hold what she was feeling. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that this man knew what it meant to be abandoned by the world, to be left with nothing, to have to rebuild from ashes. "I'll work hard," she said finally, her voice fierce with determination. "I promise you we'll earn our keep. You won't regret this." "I know," Cole said simply. Then he settled his hat back on his head and started down the porch steps. "Get some rest, Mrs. Holt. Morning comes early on a ranch, and tomorrow we've got work to do." He walked off toward the bunkhouse, and Mara watched him go, this unexpected savior who had appeared out of nowhere and given her family a lifeline when they were drowning. Inside, she could hear Rebecca getting the younger children into bed, their voices soft with exhaustion and contentment. Tomorrow there would be work, responsibilities, the need to prove they belonged here. But tonight, they had beds. They had full bellies. They had shelter. They had hope. Mara looked up at the stars, blazing brilliant in the clear Wyoming sky, and for the first time since Samuel died, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to survive this after all. The first week passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Mara woke each morning before dawn to the sound of roosters and the knowledge that there were mouths to feed, tasks to accomplish, a household to run. But unlike the desperate scrambling of the past months, this work had purpose and rhythm. There was enough food in the pantry, enough space for the children to move without tripping over each other, enough of everything that she could breathe without the constant weight of fear crushing her chest. Cole kept his distance, spending most of his days out with the cattle or repairing fences, taking Daniel and sometimes Joseph with him. He ate breakfast before the family woke and took his other meals either out on the range or alone in the bunkhouse. When he did join them at the dinner table, he was polite but quiet, answering the children's endless questions but never offering much about himself. Mara told herself she was grateful for the space, for his respect of boundaries. But sometimes, watching him walk back to the bunkhouse after supper, she felt something that might have been loneliness. Not her own. She had 10 children, she was never alone. But his. The way he seemed to hold himself apart, as if he'd forgotten how to be part of something larger than himself. By the second week, they had fallen into a routine that felt almost normal. Rebecca managed the kitchen with increasing confidence, creating meals from the abundance of the ranch that made the children's faces glow with health. The older boys worked alongside Cole, learning the rhythms of ranch life, coming home exhausted but satisfied. The younger children had discovered the creek and spent hours playing in the shallows, catching minnows, and building elaborate rock dams. Even Thomas seemed to thrive, his cries less frequent, his sleep more peaceful. Mara herself threw herself into work with an almost desperate energy. She scrubbed the house until every surface gleamed, mended every torn shirt and sock, organized the pantry and root cellar with military precision. She needed to prove their worth, to show that they were earning their keep, that Cole's charity, no, not charity, she reminded herself, this was work, honest work, was justified. But on the 14th day, everything changed. Mara was in the garden harvesting the last of the squash when she heard the wagon. She looked up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and felt her stomach drop. 3 men were approaching the ranch, and she recognized them immediately. Harold Thornton from the bank, Sheriff Wade, and Martin Kemp, one of the creditors who had seized the ranch after Samuel's death. She stood slowly, dirt on her hands and knees, and watched them approach with the sick certainty that this moment of peace had been too good to last. Cole emerged from the barn, Daniel beside him, and walked to meet the wagon. Mara hurried over, her heart pounding. "Gentlemen," Cole said evenly, "what brings you out this way?" Thornton climbed down from the wagon, his face set in that expression of false concern that Mara had learned to hate. "Mr. Barrett, we heard you'd taken in Mrs. Holt and her children. We thought it prudent to check on the situation." "Check on what situation?" Cole's voice was mild, but Mara could hear the edge underneath. Sheriff Wade cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, Barrett, nobody's accusing you of anything improper, but you gotta understand how it looks. A single man, a widow, 10 children, all living under one roof with no legal arrangement, no chaperone. We're not living under one roof," Cole interrupted. "Mrs. Holt and her children have the house. I'm in the bunkhouse. And the arrangement is employment, which last I checked isn't illegal." "Employment?" Kemp said with a sneer in his voice. "That's what you're calling it?" Cole's jaw tightened and Mara felt Daniel tense beside her. She put a hand on her son's arm, a silent warning to stay quiet. "That's exactly what I'm calling it," Cole said, his voice dropping into something dangerous. "Mrs. Holt works for room and board. Her children help with ranch work. Everything is proper and above board." "Proper," Thornton repeated, shaking his head. "Mr. Barrett, surely you understand the position this puts you in. The talk in town—" "I don't give a damn about talk in town." The bluntness of it seemed to shock the men. Sheriff Wade recovered first, his tone hardening. "Well, maybe you should, because talk like this can damage a man's reputation. And more importantly, it raises questions about the welfare of these children, living in questionable circumstances, no proper supervision." "No proper supervision?" Mara found her voice, anger overriding fear. "I'm their mother. I'm here. They're fed, clothed, safe, and happy for the first time in months. What more supervision do they need?" Kemp looked at her with barely concealed contempt. "Mrs. Holt, we all understand your circumstances are difficult. That's precisely why we're here. The county has resources for women in your position. There's a charitable home in Cheyenne that takes in widows, and we've made inquiries about placing the older children with families who need help." "No." The word came out flat and absolute. "You're not taking my children." "Nobody's talking about taking them," Sheriff Wade said, though his eyes said otherwise. "We're talking about finding them proper homes where they can be raised in decent, moral environments." "This is a decent, moral environment," Mara said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "Mr. Barrett has shown us more decency and morality than anyone in Bitter Creek ever did. You all stood by and watched us sleep in the street, and now you dare to come here and question his character?" "Mrs. Holt," Thornton started, but Cole cut him off. "I think you gentlemen have said your piece. Time for you to leave." "We're just trying to help," Thornton insisted, but there was something calculating in his eyes that made Mara's skin crawl. "Surely you can see that this arrangement can't continue indefinitely. What happens when winter comes and you're all snowed in together? What will people think then? People can think whatever they want, Cole said. Doesn't change the facts. Now get off my property. The three men exchanged glances. Sheriff Wade's hand moved toward his belt, and Mara's heart stopped. But he was just adjusting his coat, not reaching for his gun. We'll be back, Kemp said. And next time, we might have papers from the county about the children's welfare. You'd be wise to reconsider this situation before it comes to that. They climbed back into their wagon and left, but not before Kemp shot Mara a look that promised this wasn't over. As soon as they were out of sight, Mara's legs gave out. She sank down onto the porch steps, her whole body shaking. Cole stood rigid, staring at the dust cloud the wagon had left behind. They're going to try to take them, Mara whispered. They're going to say I'm an unfit mother, that this situation is improper, and they're going to take my children. No, they're not. You don't know that. You heard them. They'll get papers. They'll claim it's for the children's welfare. Mara. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it made her look up. His face was set with determination. They're not taking your children. I won't let them. How can you stop them? If they come with the law, then we'll fight it. We'll get a lawyer. We'll prove that the children are well cared for here, that you're a good mother, that this is a proper working arrangement. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Or we could make it indisputable. Mara stared at him, not understanding at first. Then the meaning of his words hit her like a physical blow. You mean, she couldn't finish the sentence. Marriage, Cole said bluntly. If we were married, there'd be nothing improper about the living arrangements, nothing they could use against you. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Mara gripped the edge of the porch to steady herself. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. It would be a practical arrangement, nothing more. You'd have legal protection for yourself and the kids. I'd have help running the ranch. Everyone benefits. Cole, that's insane. You don't even know me. We've known each other 2 weeks. I know enough. I know you're a hard worker, a good mother, and someone who keeps her word. What else matters? What else matters? Mara repeated incredulously. Everything else matters. Marriage it's supposed to be about love, about partnership, about survival sometimes, Cole interrupted, his voice rough. Look, I'm not talking about a real marriage, just a legal one. On paper, you'd still have your space, your independence. Nothing would have to change except the legalities. Mara stood up, needing to move, to think. This is crazy. You'd be tied to a woman with 10 children for the rest of your life, all to protect people you barely know. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do. The right thing would be to let us move on before we ruin your life any further. Cole's eyes flashed. Is that what you think? That you're ruining my life? Aren't we? Those men made it clear what they think, what everyone will think. You'll be the fool who married the desperate widow, saddled himself with 10 kids that aren't his, ruined his reputation for— I don't care about my reputation, Cole said fiercely. And I knew what I was doing when I brought you here. This doesn't change anything except making it harder for those vultures to tear your family apart. Mara felt tears burning her eyes. I can't ask you to sacrifice yourself like this. You're not asking, I'm offering. They stood facing each other in the fading afternoon light, the impossible offer hanging between them like something fragile and dangerous. I need to think, Mara said finally. It's too much. I need time. Cole nodded, his expression softening slightly. Take the time you need, but Mara, don't wait too long. Those men meant what they said. They'll be back, and they'll have the law on their side if we don't do something. He walked away toward the barn, leaving Mara alone with her spinning thoughts. That night, after the children were asleep, Mara stood at the window of her bedroom and stared out at the dark shape of the bunkhouse. A single lamp glowed in the window, and she could see Cole's shadow moving occasionally. He was awake too, probably wrestling with the same impossible situation. She thought about Samuel, about their wedding day when she'd been 19 and so full of hope and certainty. She had loved him, truly loved him, and look where that had led, to widow's weeds and destitution and children who nearly starved. What was love worth when it couldn't feed your family or keep a roof over their heads? But marrying without love, marrying purely for protection and survival, was that any better? Wouldn't it be a betrayal of everything she and Samuel had shared? Yet even as she thought it, She heard Samuel's voice in her memory from one of their last real conversations before the fever took him. "Promise me," he had rasped, his hand hot and dry in hers. "Promise me you'll do whatever it takes to keep the children safe. Don't let pride stand in the way of their survival. Promise me, Mara." She had promised. And now here was a way to keep that promise, and she was hesitating because of what? Pride? The ghost of a love that was already lost? The judgment of a town that had abandoned her? Mara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and let herself cry silently, mourning the life she'd had, the choices she wished she didn't have to make. The woman she'd been before the world had stripped everything away. The next morning, Sheriff Wade returned. This time he brought papers. Mara was kneading bread dough when she heard the horse approach. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, her stomach knotting with dread. Wade dismounted slowly, his face grim. "Mrs. Holt, I need to speak with you." "Say what you need to say." He pulled a folded document from his coat. "The county has filed a petition regarding your children. There's going to be a hearing in 2 weeks to determine whether your current living situation is appropriate for their welfare." The words hit like hammer blows. A hearing. "Yes, ma'am. You'll need to appear before Judge Morrison in Bitter Creek and demonstrate that you can provide a proper moral home for your children. If you can't—" He paused uncomfortably. "Well, the county is prepared to make alternative arrangements." "Alternative arrangements?" Mara repeated numbly. "You mean take them away?" "I mean ensure they're raised in proper homes with proper supervision." Wade shifted his weight. "Look, Mrs. Holt, I know this is hard, but you gotta see reason. A woman alone with 10 kids living on a bachelor's ranch, it's not proper, it's not right. Those children deserve better." Something in Mara snapped. All the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks, all the humiliation and desperation crystallized into pure fury. "Better?" Her voice was low and deadly. "You think being ripped away from their mother and scattered to strangers is better? You think being told their burdens nobody wants is better? Those children have been through hell. They watched their father die. They watched everything they owned be taken away. They slept in the dirt while your precious town pretended not to see them. And now that they're finally safe and fed and happy, you want to destroy that because it's not proper?" Wade's face reddened. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but the law didn't care about my children when they were starving. Don't you dare hide behind it now." Cole's voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" He had emerged from the barn, Daniel and Joseph trailing behind him. His face was calm, but there was steel in his eyes. Wade turned to him. "Just serving notice about the hearing, Barrett. 2 weeks from today. The county wants to evaluate the children's living situation." "Then they can evaluate it," Cole said evenly. "They'll find everything in order." "Will they?" Wade's expression hardened. "Or will they find exactly what everyone expects, an improper arrangement that's not suitable for children?" "They'll find a working ranch where children are cared for and safe," Cole said. "That should be all that matters." Wade shook his head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. If Mrs. Holt would just accept help from the charitable home, if she'd allow the older children to be placed with decent families." "No," Mara said again. "You're not splitting up my family." "Then come to the hearing prepared to prove you can provide for them properly," Wade said, mounting his horse. "Because Judge Morrison won't be swayed by emotional appeals. He'll want to see evidence of moral fitness and proper circumstances. And from where I'm standing, you're going to have a hard time providing that." He rode away, leaving the notice in Mara's trembling hands. She stood there staring at the paper, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. This was it. This was the end. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how well she cared for her children, it wouldn't matter. The county had decided she was unfit, and they were going to take her babies away. "Mama?" Daniel's voice was tight with fear. "What's happening? Are they really going to take us?" Mara couldn't answer, couldn't find words past the terror closing her throat. Cole moved closer, reading the notice over her shoulder. "Mara, listen to me. We can fight this, but we have to do it smart." "How?" The word came out broken. "How do we fight the law? How do I prove I'm a fit mother when they've already decided I'm not?" "By giving them no choice but to accept it," Cole said quietly. "By taking away every argument they have." Mara understood what he meant. The offer from yesterday, marriage. I can't, she whispered. I can't ask that of you. It's too much. You're not asking. I'm offering. And Mara. He waited until she looked at him. We're running out of time. That hearing is in 2 weeks. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. Rebecca had appeared on the porch, having heard the conversation. Mama, what's happening? Why are people trying to take us away? The fear in her daughter's voice broke something in Mara. These were her children, her babies. And they were terrified. She thought about the promise she'd made to Samuel, whatever it takes to keep them safe. She thought about the past months of desperation and closed doors and sleeping in the dirt. She thought about Cole's offer, practical, loveless, but genuine, a lifeline when she was drowning. If we did this, she said slowly, looking at Cole, it would be in name only, a legal protection, nothing more. I understand. And if someday I wanted to leave, wanted to take the children, and you'd be free to go, Cole said. I'd never hold you against your will. This is about giving you choices, not taking them away. Mara looked at her children, Daniel trying to be brave, Rebecca's eyes bright with unshed tears. The younger ones clustered in the doorway, not fully understanding but sensing their world was about to shatter again. She thought about the alternative, the hearing, the judge who had already made up his mind. Her children scattered to different homes, forgetting each other's faces, growing up apart and alone. No, she wouldn't let that happen, whatever it took. All right, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. All right, I'll marry you. Cole nodded, no triumph in his expression, just quiet determination. I'll ride to town tomorrow and arrange it. The circuit preacher comes through on Saturdays. We can do it then, have it done before the hearing. That's 5 days away. Can you be ready in 5 days? Ready to marry a man she barely knew, ready to tie herself legally to a stranger for the sake of her children, ready to give up any chance of a real marriage, a real partnership built on love and understanding. But those were luxuries she couldn't afford. Survival didn't wait for readiness. Yes, Mara said, I'll be ready. That night, lying in bed with Thomas sleeping beside her, Mara stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had just agreed to. In 5 days, she would be Mrs. Cole Barrett. In 5 days, her children would have legal protection. In 5 days, everything would change. But the thought that kept her awake wasn't about the marriage itself. It was something else, something she barely dared to acknowledge. When Cole had made his offer, when he'd looked at her with those steady gray eyes and promised to protect her children, she had felt something shift inside her. Not love. It was too soon, too complicated for that. But something. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. And that terrified her more than anything the county could threaten. Because marriages built on practicality and desperation were supposed to be simple, clear-cut, emotionally safe. You did what you had to do, kept appropriate distance, and protected your heart. But looking at Cole across the supper table, watching him patiently answer Sam's endless questions, seeing the way he made sure Joseph got seconds even though the boy was too shy to ask, Mara realized her heart might not cooperate with the plan to stay safely distant. And that was dangerous. Because if she let herself care, let herself hope for more than a practical arrangement, she was setting herself up for a different kind of devastation. Better to remember this was business, protection, a transaction that benefited them both. Better not to notice the kindness in his eyes or the way her pulse jumped when he said her name. Better not to let herself imagine what it might be like if this marriage of convenience became something real. 5 days. She had 5 days to prepare herself for a wedding without love, a partnership without passion, a future built on necessity rather than choice. 5 days to convince herself that would be enough. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, and Mara closed her eyes against tears she refused to shed. She had made her decision. She had done what Samuel asked, what her children needed. Now she just had to live with it. The morning Cole rode to town to make arrangements, Mara kept herself busy with frantic activity. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, reorganized cupboards that didn't need it, mended clothes that had barely worn. Anything to keep her hands moving and her mind from dwelling on what she'd agreed to. Rebecca watched her with worried eyes. Mama, you're going to wear yourself out. I'm fine, Mara said, attacking a stubborn stain on the kitchen floor with more force than necessary. Just keeping busy. You're scared. The observation, delivered in Rebecca's too-old voice, made Mara sit back on her heels. There was no point lying to a 12-year-old who had already lived through more than most adults. Yes, she admitted. I'm terrified. Rebecca came and sat beside her on the floor, her thin shoulder pressing against Mara's. Mr. Barrett seems nice. He's been good to us. I know. And this way they can't take us away. I know that too. Then why are you scared? How could Mara explain it? How could she tell her daughter that she was afraid of losing herself in this arrangement, of becoming so grateful for protection that she forgot she was supposed to be a whole person? How could she admit that part of her was terrified not that the marriage would be loveless, but that it might become something more? And she didn't know if her heart could survive being broken again. Because it's a big step, Mara said finally, and I'm not sure I'm making it for the right reasons. You're doing it to keep us together, Rebecca said with the absolute certainty of childhood. That's the rightest reason there is. Mara pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap, and sunshine, and the lavender that grew wild near the creek. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just don't always listen. Despite everything, Mara laughed. It felt strange, that bubble of lightness in her chest, but good too. Like maybe she hadn't completely forgotten how. Cole returned late that afternoon, his face carefully neutral. It's arranged, Saturday at 10 o'clock. The preacher will come to the ranch so the children don't have to make the trip. Thank you, Mara said, the words inadequate for what he was doing but all she had to offer. I picked up some things in town. He gestured to the packages on his saddle. Fabric. Rebecca mentioned you wanted to make new dresses for the girls, and there's sugar and coffee and some other supplies. Mara stared at the packages, emotion clogging her throat. He had thought of the children, of their needs, even while arranging a marriage neither of them wanted. You didn't have to do that. I know. He started unloading the supplies. But I did anyway. That night, lying awake again, Mara heard sounds from the bunkhouse, footsteps pacing, the creak of floorboards. Cole couldn't sleep either. The thought was oddly comforting. At least she wasn't alone in her uncertainty. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state. The ranch work continued, cattle to tend, meals to cook, children to care for, but underneath it all was the awareness of Saturday approaching like a storm on the horizon. Daniel took the news with surprising calm. So Mr. Barrett will be our stepfather? Legally, yes, Mara said carefully, but nothing else has to change. You can still call him Cole if you're comfortable with that. And the county can't take us away? That's the idea. Daniel nodded slowly, working through it. Seems practical, Pa would have approved. The matter-of-fact acceptance from her 14-year-old son should have relieved her. Instead, it made her ache. Children shouldn't have to be this pragmatic about adult decisions. The younger children were thrilled, seeing it as an adventure. Joseph immediately started calling Cole Papa, even though Mara gently corrected him, saying Cole was just Cole. But the boy was stubborn, and Cole didn't seem to mind, which only made Joseph more determined. Friday evening, Rebecca presented Mara with a dress she'd been secretly altering. It was Mara's best dress, or rather, her only dress that wasn't completely worn through. Let out slightly to accommodate the weight she'd lost and regained, the hem mended, the collar freshened with a bit of the lace Rebecca had been saving from before. It's not a wedding dress, Rebecca said apologetically. But it's the best we have. Mara held the dark blue fabric against her chest, tears pricking her eyes. It was practical and sensible, nothing like the white dress she'd worn when she married Samuel, but it was clean and whole and made with love, and that counted for something. It's perfect, she whispered. That night, after the children were asleep, Mara found Cole on the porch of the bunkhouse, staring out at the dark prairie. She almost turned back, not wanting to intrude on his solitude, but he'd already seen her. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. No. She climbed the steps and stood at the railing beside him, careful to maintain space between them. I needed to make sure you understand what you're doing. It's not too late to change your mind. I'm not changing my mind. But you should know, I can't promise to be a real wife, not in the ways that matter. I can cook and clean and help with the ranch, but I don't know if I can ever. She struggled to find the words. I'm not asking you to, Cole said quietly. I told you from the start, this is practical. You need protection for your kids. I need help with the ranch. That's the whole arrangement. But what if someday you want more? Want a real marriage with someone who can give you that? Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. But Mara, I'm 32 years old. I've been alone by choice for most of my adult life. I'm not harboring secret dreams of romance. This works for me as much as it works for you. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they left Mara feeling oddly hollow, which was ridiculous. She didn't want romance. She wanted safety for her children. This arrangement gave her that. All right, she said. I just needed to be sure we understood each other. We do. He paused, then added, Mara, I know this isn't what you would have chosen. I know you loved your husband and you're still grieving him. I'm not trying to replace him or compete with his memory. I'm just trying to help. That's all this is. I know. And she did know. But knowing didn't stop the complicated tangle of emotions in her chest. Gratitude and guilt, and that dangerous flicker of something else she refused to name. Saturday dawned clear and cold, the first real taste of autumn sharp in the air. Mara dressed carefully, her hands shaking as she buttoned the blue dress. Rebecca helped with her hair, pinning it up in a simple style that made Mara look older, more severe. You look beautiful, Mama, Rebecca whispered. Mara looked at herself in the small mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized, thin, worn, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. This wasn't the bride she'd been at 19. This was someone who had survived and was still surviving, making impossible choices with grace she didn't feel. The preacher arrived promptly at 10, a jovial man in his 60s who seemed oblivious to the tension in the room. Cole stood by the fireplace in his best shirt and clean trousers, his hair slicked back with water, looking uncomfortable but determined. The children gathered around, the younger ones excited, the older ones solemn. Daniel held Thomas, who was miraculously quiet, as if he understood the importance of the moment. Dearly beloved, the preacher began, and Mara felt the world narrow to this moment, this choice, this man standing beside her who was about to become her husband in name, if nothing else. The words of the ceremony washed over her like water. She heard herself make responses, heard Cole's deeper voice echoing his own vows. His hand was warm and calloused when he took hers, steady where hers trembled. I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride. The words hung in the air, awkward and presumptuous. Mara felt her face flush. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't planned for the expectation of even this small intimacy. Cole leaned forward and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her forehead. It was over in a second, but Mara felt the warmth of it long after he stepped back. Congratulations, the preacher said, beaming. May your union be blessed with many years of happiness. Mara signed the marriage certificate with a hand that barely felt like her own. Cole's signature appeared beside hers. Bold, confident strokes that somehow seemed to seal her fate more than the ceremony itself. And just like that, it was done. She was Mrs. Cole Barrett. Her children were legally protected. The county could no longer claim the arrangement was improper. The preacher stayed for a meal that Rebecca and the older girls had prepared, roasted chicken and fresh bread, and the last of the garden vegetables cooked with butter and herbs. It was a feast by their standards, and the preacher ate with enthusiasm, regaling them with stories from his circuit that had the children laughing. Cole was quiet throughout, responding when spoken to but not initiating conversation. Mara caught him looking at her once, his expression unreadable, and quickly looked away. When the preacher finally left, promising to file the marriage certificate in town on Monday, the children scattered to their afternoon chores. Mara stood in the suddenly quiet kitchen, not sure what to do with herself. That went well? Cole said from behind her. She turned to find him in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking as uncertain as she felt. Yes. Thank you for all of it. You don't have to keep thanking me. I know, but I do anyway. An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Cole cleared his throat. I should get back to work. Fence line needs checking before the weather turns. Of course. He started to leave, then paused. Mara, nothing has to change. You live your life, I'll live mine. We just have the legal protection now, that's all. I understand. He nodded and left, and Mara sank into a chair, feeling the weight of what she'd just done settle over her like a heavy blanket. She was married. Again. To a man she barely knew, in an arrangement built on necessity rather than affection. She should have felt relieved. The children were safe. That was what mattered. Instead, she felt unmoored, adrift in a situation she didn't know how to navigate. The following Monday, Cole rode to town for the hearing, taking Daniel with him. Mara had wanted to go too, but Cole had insisted she stay with the children. Let me handle it, he'd said. The marriage certificate and my testimony should be enough. So Mara waited, pacing the kitchen while Rebecca tried to distract her with tasks. The hours crawled by like years. When Cole and Daniel finally returned late that afternoon, Mara ran out to meet them, her heart in her throat. Well? She demanded before Cole had even dismounted. Cole's face broke into the first real smile she'd seen from him. It's done. Judge dismissed the petition, said a married couple on a working ranch was an appropriate environment for children. The county has no case. The relief hit Mara so hard her knees buckled. Daniel caught her arm, steadying her. They can't take us? She whispered. They can't take you, Cole confirmed. It's over, Mara. You're safe. She started to cry then, great gulping sobs of relief and release. All the fear she'd been holding back, all the terror of losing her children, came pouring out in tears she couldn't control. Cole dismounted and stood awkwardly nearby, clearly unsure what to do. Finally, he rested a hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that lasted only a moment before he stepped back. Come on, he said gently. Let's go tell the others. The children's joy was unrestrained. They whooped and hollered and danced around the kitchen, their relief matching Mara's own. Even Rebecca, usually so controlled, cried with happiness. That night, they celebrated with a special supper. Cole brought out a bottle of apple cider he'd been saving, and they toasted to new beginnings. The children begged him to stay and eat with them at the main table instead of taking his meal to the bunkhouse, and after a moment's hesitation, he agreed. Mara watched him interact with the children over the meal, saw how patient he was with their questions, how he listened when they talked about their day. Joseph showed him a bird's nest he'd found, and Cole examined it with the same serious attention he gave to ranch business. Sam demonstrated a whistle he'd learned, and Cole praised him genuinely. Even Lily, still shy around him, giggled when he made funny faces at her. He would make a good father, Mara thought, then immediately pushed the thought away. This wasn't that kind of marriage. He was helping, not becoming their father. She needed to remember that. But as the evening wore on and the children slowly headed to bed, Mara found herself reluctant to see him leave for the bunkhouse. The house felt warmer with him in it, more complete somehow. Thank you, she said as he prepared to go, for everything you did today, for protecting them. They're good kids, Cole said. They deserve protection. Still, you could have walked away at any point. Nobody would have blamed you. I would have blamed me. He pulled on his coat, his movements deliberate. Get some rest, Mara. You look exhausted. After he left, Mara did feel exhausted, but it was the good kind, the kind that came from relief rather than fear. Her children were safe. Legally, permanently safe. That was worth everything. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Cole still kept his distance, still slept in the bunkhouse, still took most of his meals alone. But there were small changes. He started coming to breakfast occasionally, helping Daniel teach the younger boys about ranch work, offering advice when Rebecca asked about preserving the last of the garden vegetables. And Mara found herself watching for those moments, looking forward to his presence at the table, missing him when he wasn't there. One evening, about 2 weeks after the wedding, she found him repairing the chicken coop while Joseph held the nails and peppered him with questions. "Why do you live in the bunkhouse instead of the big house?" Joseph asked with the bluntness of 8-year-olds everywhere. Cole hammered in a nail before answering. "Because your mama and all you kids need the space more than I do." "But you're married to mama now. Married people usually live together." "We do live together, just in different buildings." "That's weird." "Joseph," Mara called from the porch, having heard the exchange. "Don't pester Mr. Barrett." "I'm not pestering, I'm just asking." Cole caught Mara's eye and something passed between them. Amusement, understanding, a shared moment of connection over her irrepressible son. "It's fine," Cole said. "He's just curious." But that night, lying in bed, Mara wondered about Joseph's question. It was weird, wasn't it? They were married but living like strangers who happened to share property. How long could they maintain that fiction before the children started questioning it more seriously? And more troubling, did she want to maintain it? The thought came unbidden and unwelcome. She pushed it away, but it returned like a persistent fly. Because the truth was, she was starting to notice things about Cole that had nothing to do with gratitude or practicality. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when one of the children made him laugh. The careful gentleness in his hands when he helped Lily climb the fence to see the new calf. The way he listened when people talked, really listened, like what they said mattered. She was starting to like him. Not as a benefactor or employer, but as a man, and that was dangerous. October brought the first snow, light flurries that dusted the prairie white and made the children shriek with delight. Cole showed them how to track rabbit prints in the fresh powder, and they spent an afternoon following trails through the brush. Mara watched from the kitchen window, her hands busy kneading bread but her attention on the scene outside. Cole was good with them, patient in ways she hadn't expected, playful in ways that surprised her. He had taken on 10 children and never once complained about the noise or chaos or endless needs. That evening, he stayed for supper again. It was happening more often now, this sharing of meals, and Mara had stopped questioning it. The children were happier when he was there, and if she was honest, so was she. "Mama," Sam said suddenly, "when's the baby coming?" Mara nearly dropped the serving spoon. "What baby?" "The baby you and Mr. Cole are going to have. Married people have babies. That's what Mary said." The silence around the table was deafening. Mara felt her face burn while Cole suddenly became very interested in his plate. "Mary said her aunt got married and had a baby 9 months later," Sam continued, oblivious to the tension. "So I was just wondering when ours would come." "Sam," Rebecca hissed, "that's not... we don't..." "It's a fair question," Cole said quietly, saving them both. "But your mama and I aren't planning on having any babies. We got married to keep you all together and safe. That's a different kind of marriage." "Oh." Sam processed this. "So no baby?" "No baby." "Okay." And just like that, Sam went back to eating, the matter settled in his mind. But Mara couldn't shake it off so easily. Because Sam's innocent question had highlighted what she'd been trying not to think about. This marriage was a half measure, a legal fiction that protected them but left them all in a strange limbo. After the children were in bed, Mara stepped out onto the porch and found Cole there, staring at the stars. "I'm sorry about Sam," she said. "He didn't mean to be inappropriate." "He's 8. He was just curious." Cole glanced at her. "But it's a fair point. The kids are going to have questions as they get older about why we live separately, why this isn't a normal marriage." "I know." Mara wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "I don't know what to tell them." "We tell them the truth? That people make their own rules about what marriage means, that we respect each other and work together, and that's enough." "Is it?" The question escaped before Mara could stop it. "Is it enough?" Cole turned to look at her fully, and in the moonlight his face was all planes and shadows. "That depends on what you want it to be." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Mara's heart beat faster, and she realized with sudden clarity that she was standing at another threshold, another choice. She could keep things as they were, safe, distant, emotionally uncomplicated. Or she could acknowledge what was growing between them, this tentative connection that felt like it might become something more if she let it. "I don't know what I want," she admitted finally. "I'm still figuring it out." "Take your time," Cole said. "We've got nothing but time." He went to the bunkhouse, and Mara stood alone on the porch, breathing the cold air and trying to sort through the tangle in her chest. The truth was, she was starting to want more. Want the kind of marriage where Cole didn't have to leave every night, where they shared more than just meals and responsibilities. Want to know what it would feel like to be held by those strong arms? To be truly safe, not just legally, but emotionally. But wanting and having were different things. And she didn't know if Cole wanted the same, or if he was content with the arrangement as it stood. November came with bitter cold and the first real snowstorm. They woke one morning to find the world transformed, buried under 2 feet of white. Cole appeared at the house before dawn, snow dusting his shoulders. "Storm's bad," he said. "I'm moving into the spare room downstairs. Bunkhouse stove can't keep up with this cold, and if something happens to the livestock, I need to be close." It was practical, sensible, but Mara's pulse jumped at the thought of him actually living in the house, sharing their space. "Of course," she managed. "That makes sense." So Cole moved his few belongings into the small room off the kitchen, and suddenly their careful distance was harder to maintain. They passed each other in the hallway, stood side by side at the sink doing dishes, sat across the fire in the evenings while the children played. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls between them began to crack. It started with small things. Cole fixing the latch on Rebecca's door without being asked, Mara mending his shirts and finding herself taking extra care with the stitching, him teaching Daniel to play chess in the evenings, her leaving coffee ready for him when he came in from the early morning feeding. They were building something, Mara realized. Not the marriage they'd agreed to, but something else. Something that felt like partnership, like friendship, like the foundation of something that could become more. And for the first time since Samuel died, Mara felt herself hoping. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the fragile hope of happiness. She didn't know if Cole felt it too. Didn't know if this warmth between them was mutual or just her own heart betraying her with impossible wants. But as winter settled over the ranch and they all drew closer together against the cold, Mara began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were building something worth keeping, something that looked like home. The turning point came on a night in late December when the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. Mara woke to Thomas crying, a desperate, frightened sound that had her out of bed instantly. The baby's skin was burning with fever, his small body shaking with chills despite the blankets wrapped around him. "Rebecca," Mara called, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "Rebecca, wake up! I need you to heat water. Thomas is sick!" She heard footsteps thundering down the stairs, too heavy to be Rebecca. Cole appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled, shirt unbuttoned, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" "Fever. Bad one." Mara's hands shook as she tried to soothe the crying infant. "I need to get it down. I'll get the water going." Cole was already moving. "What else do you need?" "Cool cloths and the willow bark tea from the pantry, top shelf." Cole didn't question, didn't hesitate. Within minutes, he had water heating and was helping Mara strip Thomas down to cool his burning skin. Rebecca appeared with the willow bark, and together they worked to get small sips of the bitter tea into the baby's mouth. The hours that followed were a blur of fear and desperate action. Mara had lost Samuel to fever, and the terror of losing Thomas the same way threatened to paralyze her. But Cole's steady presence kept her grounded. He took turns holding the baby when her arms grew tired, changed cloths when they warmed too quickly, spoke in low, calm tones that kept the panic at bay. "He's going to be all right," Cole said as dawn broke gray and cold through the windows. "His fever's coming down. Feel his forehead." Mara pressed her palm to Thomas's skin and nearly wept with relief. Still warm, but not the terrifying burn from hours before. The baby had stopped crying and was sleeping fitfully against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw from exhaustion and emotion. "I couldn't have done this alone." "You're not alone," Cole said quietly. "Not anymore." Something in his tone made Mara look up. He was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Tender, intense, unguarded, like he'd forgotten to maintain his careful distance and she was seeing the man beneath the protective walls. "Cole," she started, not knowing what she wanted to say, but feeling the need to acknowledge this moment, this shift. The bedroom door creaked, and Joseph's sleepy voice broke the spell. "Is Thomas okay?" "He's better," Mara said, pulling her attention back to her children. "Much better." The rest of the day passed in exhausted relief. Thomas continued to improve, his fever breaking completely by evening. But something had changed between Mara and Cole during those desperate hours. The careful politeness was gone, replaced by something more intimate, more real. That evening, after the children were in bed and Thomas was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Mara found Cole in the kitchen making coffee. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Thought you might need some. He poured 2 cups, added sugar to hers without asking. He'd noticed how she took it, she realized. Still worried about the baby? A little, but mostly just grateful. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. You were wonderful with him. With all of us. Cole shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just did what needed doing. No. Mara set down her cup and looked at him directly. You did more than that. You've been doing more than that since the day we met. And I need you to know that I see it. I see you. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond their surface. Cole's gray eyes met hers, and Mara saw the question there, the uncertainty. Mara, I need to tell you something. He set his own cup down with careful precision. This marriage, this arrangement, it's not what I expected. Her heart plummeted. Here it came. He regretted it. He was going to tell her this was too much, that he couldn't do this anymore. I understand, she said quickly, already preparing herself for the blow. If you want to end this arrangement, I'll figure something out. Maybe the children and I could… No! Cole's hand shot out, catching hers before she could pull away. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's not what I expected, because I didn't expect to care this much. Mara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. I told myself this was practical, Cole continued, his thumb absently stroking the back of her hand. Help for help, that's all. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the arrangement. It became about you, about the kids, about coming home and actually having a home to come to. Cole, let me finish. He took a breath. I know this isn't what you signed up for. I know you married me to protect your children, not because you wanted a real husband, and I'll respect that. If you want things to stay the way they are, I'll never push for more. But I need you to know that I'm not staying in the bunkhouse because I don't want to be in the house with you. I'm staying there because I'm trying to respect your boundaries, your grief, your need for space. Mara felt tears slide down her cheeks. And if I said I didn't need that space anymore? If I said I wanted something different? Cole's hand tightened on hers. Then I'd say I've been waiting to hear that since the day we got married. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Mara thought about the past months, the gradual erosion of walls, the small kindnesses, the way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps on the porch. This wasn't the passionate, youthful love she'd had with Samuel. This was something quieter, steadier, built on respect and trust and the slow revelation of character. But it was real. And she wanted it. I can't promise you what this will become, she said slowly. I can't promise I won't be scared, or that I won't grieve Samuel sometimes, or that I'll be perfect at this. I don't need perfect, Cole said. I just need honest, real. Whatever you can give, that's enough. Then I want to try, Mara whispered. I want this to be a real marriage, not just on paper, but everything. Cole's face transformed with a smile that took years off his weathered features. Yeah? Yeah. He pulled her into his arms then, and Mara went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and breathing in the scent of him, leather and wood smoke, and something uniquely Cole. His arms wrapped around her, strong and warm and safe, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara felt truly home. We're going to have to tell the children, she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. She felt his laugh rumble through his chest. Something tells me they already know. The next morning, Mara woke to find Cole's side of the bed. Because it was his side now, they'd decided that last night between kisses that had made her feel like a young woman again. Already empty. For a moment, panic seized her. Had he changed his mind? Regretted everything in the cold light of morning? Then she heard voices from downstairs, Cole's deeper tones mixed with the children's excited chatter. She dressed quickly and descended to find the entire family gathered around the breakfast table, with Cole at the head serving pancakes. Mama! Joseph shouted. Cole's making breakfast, and he said he's moving his stuff from the bunkhouse, and does that mean he's staying in the house now? 10 pairs of eyes turned to her, ranging from Joseph's excited curiosity to Rebecca's knowing smile to Daniel's careful observation. Yes, Mara said, moving to stand beside Cole's chair. Cole's moving into the house. Permanently. Because you're really married now? Sam asked. Like actually married? We were always actually married, Cole said, his hand finding Mara's and giving it a gentle squeeze. But yes, we're going to be doing things more like a regular family from now on. Does this mean we can call you Pa? Joseph asked hopefully. Cole looked at Mara, uncertain. She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. If you want to, Cole said to Joseph, but only if you're comfortable with it. I'm comfortable, Joseph declared. Pa, Papa, Dad, which one do you like? Any of them is fine by me, Cole said, and Mara heard the emotion in his voice too. Daniel stood up from the table and crossed to where Cole sat. He extended his hand formally, like a man rather than a boy. Thank you, he said quietly, for taking care of us, for taking care of Mama. Cole shook his hand solemnly. You're good kids, makes it easy. And thank you for not trying to replace our Pa, Daniel continued, for respecting his memory. I could never replace him, Cole said, but I can be here for you now. That enough? Daniel nodded, and Mara saw tears in her oldest son's eyes before he quickly wiped them away and returned to his seat. The rest of breakfast was chaotic and joyful, with the children peppering Cole with questions and making plans for how they'd help move his things from the bunkhouse. Mara sat at the table, Thomas on her lap, and watched her family, because that's what they were now, truly, and felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Peace. January brought a cold snap that kept them all close to the house. Cole used the time to teach Daniel and Joseph how to repair tack and maintain tools, while Mara and Rebecca worked on sewing projects and taught the younger girls how to knit. The evenings were spent around the fire, Cole reading aloud while children dozed against various shoulders, the house warm with more than just heat from the stove. One night, after the children were all in bed, Mara and Cole sat together on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder. I got a letter from town today, Cole said. Thornton at the bank heard about us. About the marriage being real now. He wanted to make sure I knew what I was taking on. Mara stiffened. What did you tell him? That I know exactly what I'm taking on, and it's none of his business. Cole's arm tightened around her. But it made me think about something. Your old ranch, the one that was seized for Samuel's debts. What about it? It's been sitting empty. Nobody wants to buy it because the land's not great and the house needs work. But I was thinking, maybe we could make an offer. Buy it back. Mara sat up, staring at him. Cole, we can't afford that. Actually, we probably can. Cattle prices were good this year, and I've been saving. Won't get it for what Samuel paid, but we might get it for what he owed. And then, he paused, seeming uncertain. We could give it to Daniel when he's old enough. Start him with his own place. The generosity of it stole Mara's breath. You would do that? For Daniel? He's a good kid, works hard, deserves a future. Cole pulled her back against him. Besides, he's my son now too. That means something to me. Mara kissed him then, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and wonder she felt for this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to make. February brought the first signs of spring, early thaws and the return of birds to the cottonwoods by the creek. The children grew restless with cabin fever, and Cole took them on long walks to look for the first wildflowers, teaching them the names of plants and how to read the sky for coming weather. Mara watched from the porch one afternoon as Cole helped Lily climb a low tree branch, his patience infinite as she worked up the courage to let go of his hand. He's good with them, Rebecca said, appearing beside her mother with a basket of mending. He is. You love him. It wasn't a question, but Mara answered anyway. Yes, I do. Different than you loved Pa, Mara considered. Yes, but that doesn't make it less real. Your father and I, we grew up together, fell in love young. What I feel for Cole is, it's built on different things. Respect, trust, the knowledge that we chose each other even when we didn't have to. I'm glad, Rebecca said softly. I'm glad you're not alone anymore. In March, they made the trip to town to finalize the purchase of Samuel's old ranch. The transaction was simple. Thornton could barely hide his surprise that Cole actually had the money, and within a week the deed was transferred. We'll fix it up slow, Cole said as they stood looking at the weathered house that held so many of Mara's memories. Get it livable again. Then, when Daniel's ready, maybe in a few years, it'll be his. Daniel stood beside them, his young face serious as he took in the property. "I'll work hard," he said. "I'll make it worth what you paid." "You already have," Cole said simply. "You're a good son, Daniel. Both your fathers would be proud." The boy ducked his head, but Mara saw the smile he tried to hide. By April, the ranch was in full spring bloom. The garden was planted, the cattle were calving, and the house rang with life and laughter. Cole had long since moved all his belongings into the main house, and his presence there felt as natural as breathing. One evening, Mara stood at the window of their bedroom, she still marveled at that, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About how different everything is from a year ago. About how close we came to losing everything." "But you didn't lose it. You fought for your kids, made impossible choices, survived when you had every reason to give up." "We survived," Mara corrected. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Maybe we needed each other," Cole said. "Maybe that's how it was supposed to work out." Mara turned in his arms to face him. "Do you ever regret it? Taking on a widow with 10 children? All the responsibility and chaos and—" Cole silenced her with a kiss. "Not for a single second. You want to know what I regret? I regret all the years I spent alone, convinced that was enough. I regret not finding you sooner." "We found each other when we were supposed to," Mara said, "when we both needed saving." "I don't know about that," Cole said with a slight smile. "I think maybe you saved me more than I saved you." From downstairs came the sound of Joseph calling for them, something about a frog he'd found that he was certain they needed to see immediately. Cole laughed. "Duty calls." They went down together to admire the frog, to help Ruth with her arithmetic, to settle an argument between the middle boys about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. The evening passed in the beautiful chaos of family life, and when the children were finally all in bed, Mara and Cole sat on the porch in the warm spring darkness. "You know what I was thinking today?" Mara said. "What's that?" "I was thinking about the day we met. How I was standing in that town with nowhere to go, convinced my life was over, and you rode in like something out of a story." "I'm no hero," Cole protested. "You are, to me. To all of us." Mara took his hand. "You gave me back my life, Cole. You gave my children a future. You gave us all a home." "We gave each other a home," Cole corrected. "That's how it works when you love someone." The words still felt new, though they'd said them before. Mara leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the night air that smelled of sage and possibility. "I love you," she said. "In case I don't say it enough." "You say it every day in 100 ways," Cole replied, "but I never get tired of hearing the words." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, one of the children coughed in their sleep. A cow lowed in the distance. The normal sounds of their life. A year ago, Mara had lost everything, had stood at the edge of despair with 10 children and no hope. Now she sat on the porch of a home that was truly hers, beside a man who had chosen to love not just her, but all the complicated, messy, beautiful pieces of her life. Her children were safe, fed, happy. They had a future spread out before them, like the prairie, wide and full of potential. She thought about the woman she'd been in that dusty town, so certain that no one would want a widow with 10 children. And she thought about the man who had looked at her and seen not a burden, but a gift. "What are you smiling about?" Cole asked. "I'm just happy," Mara said simply. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again." Cole pulled her closer. "Good. You deserve it." "We deserve it," Mara corrected. "All of us." And there, under the vast Wyoming sky, with the house full of sleeping children behind them and a lifetime of tomorrows ahead, Mara finally believed it. They had built something from the ruins, something stronger for having been broken first. They had built a home, a family, a love worth waiting for. And that, she thought, as Cole's arms tightened around her, was worth everything they'd survived to find it. The end.